The Buddha once said, "Whoever sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. Whoever sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination." This statement, found in the Sutta Nikaya, reveals that Paṭiccasamuppāda is not merely one doctrine among many in Buddhism, it is the beating heart of it. In fact, it is said that after his enlightenment, the Buddha spent weeks contemplating this principle alone, not rushing to teach until he had fully seen its implications. The realization of dependent origination is, in essence, what distinguishes a Buddha from a philosopher or sage. But why is this teaching so profound? Because it explains everything from the suffering of a single moment of craving to the endless rebirths of sentient beings in the sastric cycle. Unlike other world religions that posit a divine creation, a first cause, or a metaphysical soul that traverses lifetimes, Paṭiccasamuppāda dares to suggest that the universe and the self are not things, but processes, and processes that have no beginning. This essay attempts a deep, rigorous exploration of this concept, not just the formula of the 12 links, but its radical implications that time, self, and even existence itself are conditional, not absolute. And if that is true, it leads to a shocking conclusion. There was never a first moment, never a creation event, never an original cause. The universe is beginningless, not in the poetic sense, but in the most literal and precise way. And understanding this, truly understanding it, is the first step toward liberation. The term Paṭiccasamuppāda is a compound Pali word composed of two roots. Paika, meaning because of, dependent on, or having relied upon, and Samuppada, meaning arising, origination, or coming into existence. Together, they signify a phenomenon that arises only because of other conditions. Nothing exists in and of itself. This is the central insight. There is no intrinsic being, no isolated entity, no ultimate origin point. Everything that is, arises because of something else. When the causes cease, so too do the results. The principle of Paṭiccasamuppāda is most famously encapsulated in a short yet profound formula, often quoted in the Pali Canon. Imasmi sati. Ida hoti, imasa apada, ida upajati. Imasmi asati, ida nahoti, imasa naroda, ida nirajati. Sutta Nikaya. This deceptively simple formula is the skeleton key to understanding the Buddha's vision of reality. It can be applied to psychological events, physiological reactions, social patterns, birth and death, and even the entire cycle of rebirth. It is the ultimate theory of causation, but not in the mechanical, linear way that Western science often frames it. Rather, it's a dynamic web of codependency, a matrix in which nothing stands alone. In practical terms, the Buddha applied Paṭiccasamuppāda to explain the arising of dukkha, suffering, or unsatisfactoriness. Why do we suffer? Not because we are sinful, not because we are cursed, not because of divine punishment, but because of conditions, specifically conditions rooted in ignorance and craving. The core application of this principle is expressed in a sequence known as the 12 links of dependent origination, which will be examined in detail in the next section. But here, it is important to understand that these 12 steps are not random. They represent a deep, experiential chain, psychological and ontological, that sustains the illusion of self and the continuation of sastra. Let us briefly preview them here. Avijja, Sakar, Vaya, Namarupa, Sayatana, Phassa, Vedana, Ta, Upadana, Bhava, Jati, Jarmara. What is striking about this chain is its interconnectedness. No single link is independent, and no link stands as a permanent entity. The entire structure is like a wheel turning upon itself, with ignorance as its central hub. But Paṭiccasamuppāda is not just a theory. It is a description of your own experience, moment by moment. When contact occurs at the sense bases, feelings arise. If we are unaware or untrained, craving follows feeling. Craving leads to clinging, and clinging shapes our entire existence. And so we are born into another identity, moment by moment, and life after life. Thus, Paṭiccasamuppāda is not abstract metaphysics. It is a radical phenomenology. It describes the way this self is fabricated continuously through conditioned processes. And if these processes can be seen clearly and interrupted, particularly at the links of feeling and craving, then the entire chain can be dismantled. The Buddha himself did not present this teaching as something to speculate about, but to see directly. The power of this principle lies in its immediacy, at this very moment. What are you experiencing? What is its cause? Is it dependent on conditions? If those conditions cease, will the experience continue? This is the insight of Paṭiccasamuppāda. At the heart of the Buddha's insight into the nature of existence is the structure known as the 12 links of dependent origination. This chain outlines the unfolding of suffering and how the illusion of self and the cycle of samsara are perpetuated, though often interpreted cosmologically to describe the cycle of rebirth. These 12 links also operate moment to moment, psychologically and existentially in the formation of identity, craving, and suffering. Let's now examine each link with clarity and depth. This is the first and most foundational link. Avijja does not merely mean not knowing, but a deep, existential misunderstanding of reality. It refers to ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, of impermanence, not self, and suffering. Avijja is not a passive absence, but an active distortion. It clouds perception, sustains craving, and leads us to cling to what is inherently unstable. In a moment-to-moment sense, ignorance arises each time we fail to see the conditioned nature of experience. It is the soil in which all the subsequent links take root. Ignorance gives rise to sakkhara, mental formations, or volitional activities. These are intentional acts, karmically significant impulses that arise in the mind due to ignorance. In essence, these are the seeds we plant through thought, word, and deed, all shaped by our delusions. They are classified in three kinds: bodily formations, verbal formations, mental formations. These sakkhara condition the next link, consciousness, giving it a karmic trajectory. Conditioned by mental formations, vaya arises. This is consciousness, but not as an eternal entity. In Pali, it literally means knowing separately. It refers to sense consciousness, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, etc. In the context of rebirth, it refers to relinging consciousness, which is established at the moment of conception, bringing karmic seeds from previous lives. But in the present moment view, this consciousness arises constantly based on contact and falls away immediately. It is not a soul, but a conditioned process. Once consciousness arises, it conditions the arising of namarupa, the psychophysical organism. Nama includes feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention. Rupa includes the physical body and its components. Together, these form the experiencing subject, the sense of being of me who experiences the world. But again, this self is not fixed. It is built upon the interaction of mental and material components, all of which are changing and contingent. Because of mentality and materiality, the six sense faculties come into play: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. These are the portals through which the world is constructed. Without these faculties, no world would appear to consciousness. This shows that the world is not something out there, but arises dependent on the internal conditions of the body and mind. With sense faculties in place, contact arises. Contact is the meeting point of a sense organ, a sense object, and the corresponding consciousness. Contact is not passive. It is the moment experience is formed. At this link, the process becomes highly dynamic and immediate. Experience begins to feel real and solid. From contact, feeling arises. Vedana does not mean emotion in this context, but sensation pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Feeling is the critical turning point. It is here that craving tends to arise. The Buddha pointed out that dependent on feeling, craving arises. Unless there is mindful observation, the mind immediately seeks to grasp pleasant feelings and reject unpleasant ones. Here begins the fertile ground of dukkha. Ta means craving, thirst, or addiction. It is the urge to possess, avoid, or become. There are three main types: kamada, craving for sensual pleasures; bhavata, craving for becoming or existence; vibhavata, craving for non-existence or annihilation. Ta feeds the illusion of self. I want, I need, I must have. It perpetuates the wheel of becoming. To sensual pleasure, to views or opinions, to rites and rituals, to the idea of self. At this stage, identity becomes strongly reinforced. One begins to say, this is me, this is mine. Bhava is the momentum of identity formation, the inner push toward existence, which leads directly to, this is the actual arising of identity. Jati means birth, both literal and metaphorical. It refers to the formation of a being within a certain realm or identity structure. In human terms, every time the mind says, "Now I am this," a kind of birth has occurred. We are born into anger, joy, grief, or pride, depending on how we cling and identify. On the macro scale, Jati refers to literal rebirth in future lives due to karmic formations. Inevitably, what is born must die. Dharma is the aging and death that result from birth. Along with it comes sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. This is not just physical death, but the constant dying of each self-structure, each illusion of permanence. Every identity formed through craving must decay. This is the climax of the chain. From a single moment of ignorance, the entire process unfolds. And what is its fruit? Repeated suffering, again and again. But here lies the genius of the Buddha's insight. If suffering has a cause, it can also have a cessation. If the chain is conditioned, it can be deconstructed. If ignorance is replaced with wisdom, the links dissolve. This is the key. Paṭiccasamuppāda is not fatalistic, it is liberative. Just as each link leads to the next in bondage, so too can each insight sever the next, leading to freedom. To the untrained eye, the 12 links of Paṭiccasamuppāda might appear as a straightforward linear progression from ignorance to aging and death. But a deeper examination reveals that the model is not linear at all. Instead, it functions as a closed cycle, a vicious circle that loops endlessly, sustaining the sastric existence, birth, death, rebirth again and again without a discernible beginning. This understanding is crucial, not just theoretically, but for meditation and liberation. The power of this insight lies in breaking the illusion that we are moving forward in time or toward a final destiny. Rather, we are looping again and again through patterns of craving, clinging, and becoming. Although the 12 links are often presented sequentially for analytical clarity, they do not represent a one-time event. They are mutually conditioning, and many operate simultaneously or recursively. For instance, avijja gives rise to sakkhara, which gives rise to vaya. Yet vaya also conditions namarupa, which in turn further supports vaya. This recursive relationship between consciousness and name and form is particularly highlighted in the Mahanidana Sutta, where the Buddha speaks of their interdependence. It is as if two sheaves of reeds were leaning against one another. If one were to be removed, the other would fall. Thus, the so-called beginning of the chain ignorance is not really the first cause in a chronological sense. There is no clear point of entry into the cycle, like a wheel turning. Every point is both a cause and an effect. This makes the teaching of Paṭiccasamuppāda radically non-linear and non-theistic, unlike the worldview of Abrahamic religions, which posit a first cause or divine creation. In traditional Theravada commentary literature, the 12 links are sometimes mapped across 3 lives. Past life. Avijja. Sakkhara. Present life. 3. Vaya. 4. Namarupa. 5. Sayatana. 6. Phassa. 7. Vedana. 8. Ta. 9. Upadana. 10. Bhava. Future life. 11. Jati. 12. Dharma. This cosmological framework was developed to show how karma and rebirth unfold across lifespans. It has pedagogical value, but it also risks turning the model into a static narrative, suggesting a beginning in a past life. However, in the suttas themselves, the model is often presented as present moment experience, happening continuously and instantaneously, moment after moment. In this momentary interpretation, each link can be seen as arising and ceasing within a single moment of consciousness. For example, a pleasant feeling arises. Craving arises toward that feeling. Clinging develops. A subtle identity is born. Even here, Jati and Dharma do not refer solely to biological events but to psychological births and deaths, the arising and dissolution of ego states, moods, or roles. This momentary loop can repeat dozens, even hundreds of times in a single hour. Every unguarded contact with the world can become another spin of the wheel, another loop in the cycle of sasra. The word sasra literally means wandering or continuous flowing. It is not a journey forward or upward. It is a revolving wheel, spinning due to ignorance and craving. The image of a wheel is found repeatedly in the Pali Canon. The wheel of becoming represents the endless cycle of rebirths. The wheel of the Dhamma is the Buddha's teaching which breaks that cycle. The 12 links thus map out how the wheel turns. But it's also vital to realize that the turning is not necessary. It's not part of the nature of things to turn forever. It turns only because the conditions for turning are present. Thus, the moment one link is understood clearly and cut off, the wheel is broken. One of the deepest philosophical implications of Paṭiccasamuppāda is that it presents a universe without a first cause, a cosmos not created by a deity, not initiated by a big bang in metaphysical terms, nor arising from some primal substance. It is instead a dynamic, causally conditioned process that has no beginning, no first moment, no alpha point at which it all began. This view is so revolutionary that it challenges both religious creation myths and certain metaphysical versions of materialism. The Buddha's insight into the endless, beginningless nature of sastra is not merely a cosmological claim. It has profound existential and soteriological consequences. Let's now explore how Paṭiccasamuppāda explains the universe without a starting point, and why that matters. The Buddha explicitly refused to answer speculative questions about the origin of the world, the soul, or the cosmos. In several suttas, when asked such questions, he remained silent or redirected the conversation to the path of liberation. In the Agivakagata Sutta, the wanderer Vakagata asks the Buddha, "Is the world eternal or not eternal? Finite or infinite?" The Buddha replies, "That is not conducive to the holy life, not connected to the goal, not part of the Dhamma." Why? Because in the Buddha's vision, asking about beginnings misunderstands the nature of reality. Reality is not a linear chain that started with a bang or a creator. It is a cyclic, dependent process. Paṭiccasamuppāda sidesteps the classic infinite regress problem that plagues both theistic and mechanistic models. In the Pali Canon, the Buddha declares, "The Vedic and Upanishadic traditions posited a cosmic self or creator god as the origin. The Skaya school taught a dualistic universe of Purva and Prakti interacting since time immemorial. Jainism proposed a universe without a beginning too, but with eternal souls. The Buddha stood apart by affirming both beginninglessness and not-self. There is no soul, no God. No uncaused cause, just an endless flow of causality that traps beings in suffering unless wisdom intervenes. Why do we want to know the beginning? Because we believe that if we know the start, we can make sense of everything that follows. But this craving for an origin is actually a symptom of ignorance, the very first link of Paṭiccasamuppāda. The need for a first cause implies that there must be an originating agent, that existence has an ultimate purpose, that we can trace our suffering to a singular fault or event. But these assumptions themselves are born of a diluted view of self and reality. The Buddha taught that no link in the chain stands alone, and thus no moment of existence can be called the first. In the Asela Sutta, the Buddha explains, "One who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. One who sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination." This is the secret. The cosmos doesn't need an origin story, it needs a path out of suffering. In modern physics and cosmology, time is often treated as linear, a one-way street from past to future. But in Paṭiccasamuppāda, time is cyclical and conditional. What matters is not when something happened, but why, what caused it, and what it causes in turn. This has two important implications. Time is not absolute, causality is. The structure of existence is recursive, not linear. Take, for example, the link between consciousness and name and form. Consciousness arises dependent on name and form. Name and form arises dependent on consciousness. This mutual dependence creates a closed system, a feedback loop rather than a causal chain. It resembles the structure of autopoietic systems in modern complexity theory, systems that self-generate through interdependent processes. This is not mysticism. It is a logical framework that explains why looking for a first cause is futile, because there is no point at which causality starts. It is like asking, where does the circle begin? While this might sound abstract or even bleak, the Buddha's message is the opposite. The very structure of causality that binds beings to suffering is the key to liberation. Why? Because if suffering arises due to conditions, it can also cease due to conditions. That's the power of Paṭiccasamuppāda. It doesn't merely explain the problem. It also reveals the solution. The secret of Paṭiccasamuppāda is not that the universe is endless, but that you don't have to be trapped in it. When this is, that is. With the arising of this, that arises. When this is not, that is not. With the cessation of this, that ceases. This is the most profound optimism in all religious thought. There is no creator to appease, no eternal soul to polish, no beginning to uncover. There is only a chain of suffering, and it can be broken. The search for the beginning of the universe is the wrong question. The question is, can the chain of suffering end? And the answer is yes. Paṭiccasamuppāda reveals a universe that has no absolute start, but which arises lawfully and conditionally, moment by moment. The secret is not some cosmic mystery, but the direct and liberating insight that conditions can cease. In a world where nothing is eternal, nothing is truly bound. And in that lies the freedom the Buddha discovered. While Paṭiccasamuppāda explains how suffering and rebirth arise, its true significance lies in what it reveals about freedom. It doesn't merely describe the problem of existence, it also illuminates the way out. The cessation of dukkha is not a metaphysical annihilation, but the ending of the conditions that perpetuate the cycle. The goal of the Buddha's path is nibbana, a state where the wheel of dependent origination no longer turns, where ignorance, craving, and becoming have been brought to a full stop. This is not a place, not a realm, and not a state of consciousness. It is the end of conditioned becoming, and thus the liberation from samsara. Let us now examine in detail how Paṭiccasamuppāda points toward this ultimate cessation and what it truly means to break the chain. The entire wheel of Paṭiccasamuppāda turns due to avijja, ignorance, not a mere absence of knowledge, but a deep misperception of reality. Mistaking the impermanent for permanent, the unsatisfactory for satisfying, the not-self for self. When right view is cultivated, through ethical living, concentration, and insight, this fundamental ignorance is uprooted. And with its cessation, the rest of the links collapse like a burning rope disintegrating midair. This is precisely the logic used in the Samyutta Nikaya. With the cessation of ignorance, formations cease. With the cessation of formations, consciousness ceases. With the cessation of consciousness, name and form ceases. Thus is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. This is reverse causality, not backward in time, but sequential and unraveling. Just as suffering arises step by step, it ceases step by step, beginning at the root. In practice, while Paṭiccasamuppāda may seem like a profound metaphysical doctrine or an abstract psychological analysis, the Buddha taught it for practical, liberating purposes. It is not meant for intellectual entertainment or philosophical speculation, but for transforming one's relationship with suffering, self, and the world. This section explores how an experiential understanding of dependent origination reshapes our personal psychology, our ethical behavior, our meditation practice, and ultimately, our entire way of living and perceiving existence. At its core, dependent origination reveals how the illusion of self is constructed moment by moment. Feeling arises, we crave pleasant feelings or resist unpleasant ones. That craving becomes clinging to identities, roles, opinions, and narratives. Clinging gives rise to becoming, the constant remaking of me in relation to experiences. This becoming leads to suffering, conflict, and rebirth, not just in a future life, but in every moment we re-identify with a sense of I am this. When a practitioner sees this process clearly, they stop reacting automatically to sensations and thoughts. They begin to deconstruct the fabricated self. They cease identifying with body, feelings, perceptions, volitions, and consciousness, the five aggregates. This insight is not cold or alienating. Rather, it brings profound peace and freedom. Without clinging to me or mine, one is no longer pulled around by praise and blame, gain and loss, success and failure. As the Buddha said, just as a skilled butcher with a sharp knife might dissect a carcass, so too, the noble disciple analyzes the body and mind, and no self is found. Understanding Paṭiccasamuppāda naturally leads to ethical transformation. Why? Because when we see that every action has consequences and that our suffering is conditioned, not fated, we take responsibility for our choices. We see that harm to others is harm to ourselves due to interconnectedness. We understand that greed, hatred, and delusion are not personal flaws, but conditioned responses that can be weakened and uprooted. The Buddha said in 3.62, all beings are owners of their actions, heirs to their actions, born from their actions, related through their actions, and live supported by their actions. This is not determinism, it's conditionality. If you change your inputs, you change the outputs. This empowers a path of compassion, restraint, and wisdom. In this way, dependent origination becomes the foundation for sila. We refrain from killing, stealing, or lying because we see how violence ripples through causes and effects. We act with kindness not for merit, but because we understand how wholesome intentions shape better inner and outer conditions. In meditation, Paṭiccasamuppāda becomes alive. You can literally observe the links arising and ceasing in your own moment-to-moment experience. For example, a sound arises. You notice a feeling of annoyance. A thought forms. Why are they so loud? A sense of self builds. I am being disturbed. You tense up, tighten your body, and dwell in aversion. But if mindfulness is strong, you notice the bare contact without reacting. You see the feeling arise and pass away. You refuse to follow the craving. The chain is interrupted. This is why the Buddha said, when one sees with wisdom, this is suffering. This is its origin. This is its cessation. This is the path that is right view. Meditation is not about blanking the mind. It's about penetrating causality. Every moment on the cushion becomes a chance to see how suffering arises and ceases right now. Many people misunderstand karma as punishment or fate. But in the light of dependent origination, karma becomes simply intentional action that has consequences. If you've made mistakes in the past, understanding Paṭiccasamuppāda helps you see. The actions were conditioned, not chosen by a static you. You are not bound by those actions eternally. By changing your present view, intentions, and habits, you change future outcomes. This dissolves guilt, regret, and despair. You stop clinging to I am a bad person and instead see that delusion gave rise to unskillful acts. And now, with wisdom, you can choose differently. This is karmic maturity. It's not self-condemnation, but compassionate responsibility. Most people live in constant low-grade fear. Fear of aging, sickness, death. Fear of failure, insignificance, non-existence. Fear of what comes after. But if you truly understand Paṭiccasamuppāda, you see that death is simply the cessation of this conditioned flow. You see that rebirth is not a soul jumping bodies, but a continuation of craving-fueled becoming. And you realize, if craving ends, the cycle ends. This is not just comforting, it's transformative. You stop obsessing over what happens after I die and start asking, how am I creating suffering now? The present becomes the place of power. Liberation is no longer far off. It is immediate, intimate, and real. As the Buddha said, let the past be. Let the future not be longed for. What is present clearly seen? This is the path of purity. When we deeply integrate Paṭiccasamuppāda, ordinary life becomes extraordinary. We start seeing that anger doesn't arise out of nowhere. It depends on perception, memory, conditioning. That addictions are not permanent flaws. They are loops of craving and reinforcement. That relationships thrive or fail based on mutual conditioning, not fixed personalities. This empowers profound change. We take wise responsibility for how we speak and act. We let go of judging others as inherently good or bad. We practice patience, knowing that change takes time and new conditions. In this sense, Paṭiccasamuppāda is not just a Buddhist theory. It becomes a lens, a way of living with clarity and compassion. Understanding Paṭiccasamuppāda is not optional, it is essential. The Buddha said, whoever sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. Whoever sees the Dhamma sees me. It is the blueprint of bondage and the map of release. The same links that trap us, when seen clearly, become steps to freedom. In practical terms, this means watching your mind carefully, responding with wisdom, not habit, living ethically, meditating deeply, and uprooting the false sense of self. This is how suffering ends, not in heaven, not in theories, but here and now, one moment at a time. While Paṭiccasamuppāda arose in the ancient forests of India over 2,500 years ago, its resonance is not confined to spiritual seekers or Buddhist monastics. In recent decades, thinkers across disciplines, science, philosophy, psychology, and systems theory, have begun to recognize striking parallels between this ancient insight and modern understandings of reality. This section explores how dependent origination finds echoes in modern science, particularly in systems theory and complexity science, neuroscience and cognitive psychology, quantum physics and cosmology. Rather than claiming Buddhism predicted modern science, our aim is to illuminate shared patterns, a shift away from linear, dualistic thinking toward a relational, dynamic view of life and the cosmos, one where nothing exists independently. Systems theory, which emerged in biology and cybernetics in the 20th century, is built on the idea that no component of a system can be fully understood in isolation. The behavior of the whole emerges from the interactions among its parts. This precisely mirrors Paṭiccasamuppāda's fundamental proposition. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. Just as independent origination. A system arises from conditions, not from a single cause. Changing one part alters the whole, sometimes in unpredictable ways. Systems are nonlinear, recursive, and emergent, qualities that describe not only ecological systems or economies, but also mind and suffering. The Paṭiccasamuppāda cycle is not a straight line, it's a loop. Craving conditions clinging. Clinging conditions becoming. Becoming conditions birth. And the experience of birth, aging, and death feeds back into ignorance. This feedback structure aligns with modern systems concepts like positive feedback loops, self-organizing systems, homeostasis and collapse. Seeing suffering as a self-sustaining system shifts us from blaming individuals to investigating causal networks, inner and outer. Neuroscience increasingly reveals that our sense of self is not fixed or central but is constructed through brain processes, shaped by environment, language, and history, modifiable through experience. This scientific view aligns uncannily with the Buddhist insight that there is no permanent, independent self, only a stream of conditioned processes. The brain as a predictive organism. Modern cognitive models propose that the brain is not passively receiving reality, but actively constructing it through predictive models based on past data. In Buddhist terms, this is like Vedanta Upadana. Sensations give rise to craving and grasping. We don't just perceive the world, we reconstruct it through bias and habit. Brain neuroplasticity and karma. The brain's plasticity, its ability to rewire based on repeated experience, is a neuroscientific reflection of karma vipaka. As we act and think, we condition our future mental states. Negative thoughts strengthen suffering circuits. Mindfulness and kindness weaken reactivity and build resilience. This aligns with Paṭiccasamuppāda. Action shapes formations, which shape consciousness, and so on. Meditation, in this light, becomes neural deconditioning, a conscious rewiring of mind's causal flows. Quantum mechanics, particularly in its interpretation of particles and observers, undermines the idea of an objective, independently existing world. Key insights include: particles exist in superpositions until observed. Measurement affects the observed reality. Entities are entangled, they co-arise and interact instantaneously across space. Though different in context and method, this challenges the classical view of separate, enduring substances, a view already questioned in Paṭiccasamuppāda and the doctrine of emptiness. Milky Way emptiness is not nothingness. In Buddhist thought, emptiness means phenomena do not exist independently or inherently. They exist relationally. Dependently, just as in quantum entanglement or field theory. Both systems invite us to abandon object-centric thinking in favor of relational being. An electron is not a tiny thing. It is a process in a web of interactions. Likewise, the self is not a thing. It is a construct based on conditions. In cosmology, the Big Bang is the conventional marker of the universe's origin, but modern theories like cyclic cosmology, quantum loop gravity, or multiverse theories increasingly challenge the idea of a singular, absolute beginning. Some suggest the Big Bang was preceded by other universes. The universe may repeatedly arise and collapse, or it may be one manifestation of infinite causal flux. While Buddhism makes no claims about specific physics, the doctrine of Paṭiccasamuppāda does suggest the universe is not a created object, it is a pattern of conditions unfolding endlessly. This view is neither eternalism nor nihilism, but a middle way. What exists does so dependently, with no ultimate first cause or creator. As Nagarjuna, the great Buddhist philosopher, later wrote, "There is no arising, no ceasing, no origin, no destruction. Everything is empty of essence, yet interdependently real." Why do these parallels matter? Because science without wisdom can be dangerous, but science seen through the lens of Paṭiccasamuppāda leads to greater humility. recognizing that nothing is truly independent or self-made. Compassion, understanding that suffering is not due to bad people, but bad conditions. Responsibility, acknowledging that even small changes in cause can bring huge effects. This bridges the ancient and the modern, offering a new spiritual science of interdependence, one that integrates wisdom and evidence. Dependent origination is not just a spiritual insight. It is a universal principle reflected in every dynamic, every ecosystem, every brain, every relationship, every system of cause and effect. While science uncovers the how, the Buddhist teaching explains the why, and most importantly, shows us how to end suffering within this conditioned flow. Thus, Paṭiccasamuppāda becomes a bridge between East and West, between inner and outer worlds, between ancient wisdom and modern inquiry. Throughout this long and careful exploration, we have journeyed deep into one of the most profound and yet most underappreciated teachings of the Buddha, Paṭiccasamuppāda, or dependent origination. It is often called the hardest doctrine to grasp, and yet, paradoxically, it is also the simplest and most intimate, for it explains everything we experience. Let us now bring together the threads of this exploration and restate the central revelation. Nothing exists independently. No thing, no person, no event arises on its own. All phenomena, mental, physical, cosmic, are the outcome of conditions. And when those conditions cease, so too do the phenomena. This is the law, not of determinism, but of conditionality. This teaching, so profound in scope, has enormous implications. The Buddha did not teach Paṭiccasamuppāda as metaphysics. He taught it to answer one question: why is there suffering, and how can it end? The answer lies in the 12 links, the cycle of birth and death, of ignorance giving rise to craving and clinging, which leads to becoming, and hence rebirth, old age, and sorrow. This cycle is not just about literal rebirth into future lives. It describes how we are reborn psychologically each moment, into anger, fear, jealousy, craving. Each time we cling to the notion of I and mine, we are reborn into suffering. But if we reverse the links, if we interrupt the chain at any point, especially at craving and ignorance, the cycle begins to collapse. Suffering ends not through escape, but through insight. As the Buddha declared, with the cessation of ignorance, volitional formations cease, and so on down the line. Thus is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. One of the most profound implications of Paṭiccasamuppāda is that there is no absolute beginning, no uncaused creator, no original spark from which all things came. Instead, there is a timeless, beginningless web of conditions, a universe without origin, not because it is eternal in the linear sense, but because beginning and end are concepts that depend on time. And time itself is conditioned. This is a radical departure from most religious and philosophical systems. It strips away the idea of a fixed soul or a divine creator. In its place, it reveals a universe that is empty of essence yet full of meaning, because every part is connected to every other. And yet, despite its cosmic implications, the Buddha never lost sight of the human heart. The real significance of dependent origination is not in speculating about the universe, but in freeing the mind from its deepest bond, the belief in an independent self. Paṭiccasamuppāda embodies the middle way between eternalism and annihilationism. It shows that the self we cling to is neither real nor unreal, it is conditioned. And thus, we are not trapped by a permanent ego, nor are we meaningless fragments destined for oblivion. Rather, we are processes in flux, patterns of causality, with the power to influence those patterns through wisdom, ethics, and meditation. This insight avoids nihilism and opens the door to compassionate responsibility. If everything arises due to causes, and if causes can be changed, then we can live better, love better, and awaken. When the principle of dependent origination is fully realized, life changes. You stop blaming others because you see how they are shaped by conditions. You stop hating yourself because your flaws are not personal, they are conditioned patterns. You stop fearing death because there is nothing fixed to die, only processes ceasing. You stop clinging to pleasure because you see how it too is impermanent. And you stop trying to control everything because control is illusion, but careful attention is power. This doesn't make life dull, it makes it miraculous. Every flower, every thought, every emotion becomes a dance of conditions. You see the sacred in the mundane, the universal and the particular. If Paṭiccasamuppāda is a secret, it is a secret that has always been visible, but seldom truly seen. It is the secret that nothing exists alone. Everything is in motion. You are not a thing, but an event, an unfolding process. And the most important corollary, suffering can cease. This is the message of Paṭiccasamuppāda. Not despair, not fatalism, but freedom through understanding. The Buddha speaks of one who sees reality as it is. He sees what is seen, merely as seen, what is felt, merely as felt, what is cognized, merely as cognized. That is the key. To see without distortion, to understand how suffering arises and how it ends. When that is seen clearly, dependent origination is no longer just a doctrine, it is Dhamma itself. It is the rhythm of life, the heartbeat of the cosmos, and the path to liberation. As the Buddha said, he who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. He who sees the Dhamma sees me. Let us take this teaching, not as abstract theory, but as a guide to walk the path, here and now, step by step, link by link, toward the freedom that lies beyond all conditioned things.